Hey everybody, welcome back to Cooking with Calvin. Today we're going to do another classical French dish called beignets. You probably heard of it down in New Orleans, Café du Monde. So hopefully we can accomplish something very close to that. First, let's reiterate virus going around, practice the same things that we always do in the kitchen. Let's clean our hands a lot, let's sanitize all surfaces as much as possible, and let's have fun with it. So now let's go over to here. Some of the big hitters that we're going to find in a lot of our recipes, going to deal with it with all types of bread, going to deal with it with pizza dough, is yeast. So we can get this in many types of ways. The kind that I have today is an active dry yeast. So we're going to have to activate that. We also have our flour dish. This is cake flour. You can use all-purpose flour, you can use many types. This is just the one that's going to give you the best result just because the protein content gives it a lighter texture and more air bubbles in the actual recipe. And that's what you want from this. But again, you can sift all-purpose flour and you get something similar. It's not going to be the same, but it'll be similar. So now, this is where it gets tricky. As you can see, there's not a lot that is going into this. So most of what we're doing here is just technique. So the techniques that we're trying today are we need optimal water temperature to activate the yeast. We need to allow the yeast to kind of reactivate and be the living microorganism that it is. And then we also need to add everything in the same way that the order that it should be. So we're doing all dry ingredients, all wet ingredients, and then we're slowly incorporating that together. All right? So now, if you don't have a thermometer at home, the temperature that you're going for here is 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you don't have a thermometer, don't worry, you can do it by touch. So what I like to do is I lay out, we're gonna need a cup of water overall. So I'll lay out a little bit less than what we need. Get some hotter water going. Right now this water is at 100 degrees in the cup, so we just need to bring it up 10 degrees. Okay. As you bring it up a little bit more than 110, that's fine. You put it into the bowl. The bowl's probably going to be cold, so it's going to take it down a couple notches. You could also lay it into the bowl and just wait a little bit. So now what we're doing, yeast goes into the water, and then to activate the yeast again, this is where our sugar comes in. So we have 1 tablespoon of dry activated yeast, and then we have 1/4 cup of sugar. So yeast loves sugar. And that's where it's going to start eating it. It's going to start releasing. You can see now we're going from a fine granule of yeast. Now everything's incorporated. Good indication that you're got the right temperature and everything's going according to plan. Give it a quick sniff. You'll start to smell the yeast coming off of it. It'll start to let out all of its gases. It'll start eating up the sugar. So now this has gone from just a dry active yeast to now it's a living yeast that is now eating everything. So then we come over to here. So our flour, this is just 3.5 cups of flour. Well, just a pinch of salt into it. So the reason you're not putting the salt into the yeast is because once the yeast eats the salt, then it stops its expansion process. Stops releasing those bubbles, so you want to activate it in this bowl, get it fully activated before it even touches over here. Now we want to come over to here. We have evaporated milk. That's going to be 1/4 cup evaporated milk. 2 eggs, which we will now whisk together. and 3 tablespoons of butter. So the butter we've melted ahead of time, we've even browned it a little bit. So with that, you're gonna get a nice, almost nutty finish. You don't have to brown the butter, but that's just my personal preference. I've always liked brown butter more than just regular butter. So now we're incorporating evaporated milk, both eggs, and the 3 tablespoons of melted butter. So ideally, we want to let this mixture sit. You can actually see it happening right now, is everything's foaming up to the top. So that's something that we want to start to see. So we let it sit maybe 5-7 minutes and just get everything incorporated. Now mix the salt into the flour. We also want to use a whisk to do this because we're getting air pockets developed into the cake flour. So what we're doing is we're making the dough right now. We're gonna let it sit. We're gonna let it rise for maybe about hour and a half. And then over to here, we're gonna wanna get pan ready with vegetable oil. That's gonna be at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's gonna be cooking. But again, we wanna make the dough first. And then let it rise. Rising is gonna make it so that the yeast is gonna make the air bubbles in the actual dough, and that's gonna give us those nice light air pockets when we bite into these at the end. So here we are. We can see that there's a film forming on top of our yeast, sugar, and water mixture. The smell coming off of it, that indicates that we are ready to go. So if you have a stand mixer, you would get your stand mixer on, put your dough hook attachment in, but I'm going to show you, just in case you don't have one, we're gonna do it from hand. So we wanna slowly, don't wanna put too much in at a time. Just slowly pouring this in, mixing as we go. You don't wanna brutalize this dough, because then we're gonna destroy all the air pockets that we made. They're gonna destroy the yeast process. There's gonna be no air in it. And once again, everybody will laugh at you. So we want nice, light, fluffy beignets. So now we have that. Now all we're doing, we're going around. We're just scraping the outside. Right, and that's getting everything incorporated. Again, over mixing is your enemy on this. You're gonna wanna just start scrambling it all together. That's the last thing we want. So now we come over to here. We have our butter, have our evaporated milk. Now one thing to watch out for here is you're gonna see evaporated milk, you're gonna see condensed milk, and you're gonna see sweetened condensed milk. If you're going with a sweetened condensed milk, that's fine, but just adjust whatever sugar that you're putting into it so you're not making a really, really sweet beignet. The recipe that we're doing here today, we're kind of keeping neutral, adjusting the amount of sugar that we have into it. For me, I know I prefer a more savory beignet. A lot of the times you're gonna see it, it's gonna have confectioner sugar on top of it. I prefer mine to have a lot of characteristics of a sweet, or not a sweet, savory dish. Now we're really just going around the edges. Everything's gonna incorporate it into it, just naturally. You don't wanna do too much to disturb it. So you're just going around the edges. Every once in a while, that lump right in the center is gonna hook right onto whatever you're stirring this with. And that's fine, that'll break it up where it needs to. You can see the lumps are getting smaller, getting smaller. Everything's just kind of getting thicker, coming together a little bit more. So now you can start to adjust. You can say, hey, I think this is a little bit loose. So now we go over, now we just want to get a little bit more flour into it. Now, that's not to say, let's go crazy. Just start adding in a lot, because we're also, after the rising process, we're gonna have a floured surface that we bring it onto. We also add a little bit of flour on top. So we want just a little bit at a time. And here we have it. So this is the process where now we want to stop and we want to cover this. We want to put this in a warm enough place where the rising starts to happen for the dough. So the rising process is going to expand this about twice its size. It's also where we're going to get our air pockets from, where the gluten starts to form, and everything good about this is going to start happening. So we want to really give this, leave it alone. We're gonna get a clean towel, just wanna cover it. Now we're covering it with a moist, clean towel, just because we don't want the surface, that air to touch it. And then it's gonna create a crust on the top part. So now we're gonna take this, we're gonna put it right over to here. That's our warm spot in the kitchen. We're gonna just leave it alone, let's say hour, hour 15, hour and a half, however long it takes for that to double in size. And also form what it needs to form. So another test of patience, but let's get through it. And here we are. As you can see, it's doubled up. We have all these air bubbles coming up to the top. So now, long awaited, start rolling. Now the oil that I mentioned before, we have it over here, we have a thermometer in it. We want ideally 350 degrees Fahrenheit. If you don't have a thermometer at home again, do a little splash of flour or something into it just to test how hot it is. So let's start out with this. Just want a little flour right at the bottom. That dough is going to be very sticky coming out. So if you want to get in there with your hands, make sure you have flour in your hands. Just scraping down the bowl, getting everything out. Again, super, super sticky dough. That's kind of what you want right now. Dough will come with a little bit more flour on top. Now you don't want to roll it out so much that you get all of that area that you've been working so hard for. You don't want to press that out. What you can do is we're going to get all the excess dough off of my hands. Now we want to make it, I like it to be about a 1/4 inch thick. Size-wise, I mean, really go over big or small you want. Just know that you're going to have to kind of regulate how fast it cooks. If you do smaller, if you do bigger, might not cook all the way through, so you'd have to finish it in the oven. But either way. So now we want to get a little bit of flour on the rolling pin. Again, don't just start slamming down on it. Don't start just rolling out. You want to just lightly bring it out. you're not even pressing down that much. It's a very delicate dough, so it's not going to give you a lot of resistance. Roll it out. Then you're going to come, just cut it into this size that you want. If you're doing this on a counter, try not to use a knife. You probably mess up your counter and your knife at the same time. Now, I'm going to come in, they're going to be super delicate. I'm going to get under one. You'll just shake off the excess flour. Now we go straight in. So even there we had, the oil was at about 365. Now once you drop something into there, the oil temperature is going to immediately drop, so you're going to get that ideal temperature that you want. Now all that air is making everything rise to the surface, so the underside is getting cooked here, while the top side is not. So halfway through you're going to have to flip it. So you can start to see here, all the underside is getting browned. Once you start to see that browning happen, you just come in, try to flip it over. So now we have that golden brown that's happening. So these are a quick process, 1 to 2 minutes, just for the size that I had. It's not long at all. And then the second that you get it out, you're going to want to season it up while that oil is still right on the outside surface, and it still has something that all of your seasoning can attach to. Now, I said before that what I like is savory beignets. So what I have over here is a little bit of kosher salt, olive oil, Parmesan, and fresh rosemary. Take that out, nice golden brown. Come over to here, and I hit it with a little bit of olive oil first. Parmesan, rosemary. Now we have that rosemary in there. Kind of taste one, see if it needs salt. And then these can come right out. You want to enjoy these right away. Now it's going to absorb all of that olive oil. Maybe you're like me and you like a little bit of extra cheese on it. There you have it. That is our beignets of the day. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.